Every journey begins with a single step. For our friend, the hydrogen atom, that step is a bold leap from being part of a water molecule to an emissary of energy. In the heart of an electrolysis chamber, powered by renewable energy, water is transformed. Oxygen steps back, releasing the vibrant hydrogen atom. Alone, hydrogen is volatile, but when paired with captured CO2 and the help of a touch of alchemy, together, they forge a potent synthetic fuel. A new energy carrier, clean, efficient, ready to power our world. Innovative companies are investing in the production of eFuels, which can then be distributed via the existing infrastructure to industry and consumers, providing them with a climate-friendly alternative to conventional fossil fuels. Aviation, maritime, heavy goods transport, even your car, eFuels power a wide range of sectors and offer a sustainable solution to our diverse energy and mobility needs. We at the eFuel Alliance embrace the entire value chain and give it a face and a voice. Our goal is political acceptance and regulatory consideration of eFuels as a significant contribution to sustainable climate protection. In the quest for green energy, eFuels are an essential piece of the puzzle, linking today's infrastructure to a more sustainable future. The eFuel Alliance is powering this transition, forging a path from hydrogen to hope, because the future of energy is now.
Hello and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar presenting our eFuel potential study. We are genuinely grateful for the strong interest you have shown. The eFuel Alliance has been founded in the summer of 2020 with a clear mission to raise awareness and build acceptance for renewable fuels, both in the public discourse and among policymakers. When we started, the number of companies with concrete plans or pilot projects for eFuels were still modest. Less than 6 years later, we are looking at a global industry and it is ready. Around 500 projects have been announced, are in the planning, or are already being implemented. Roughly 300 of them target the transport sector. The remaining 200 focus on industry. More than 120 companies are actively working to make the eFuels market ramp up a reality. The eFuel Alliance is a voice of this global industry. Today, we represent over 160 members from 19 countries and 5 continents. Each year, we speak at more than 70 events in Japan, Korea, India, the Middle East, across Europe, and in the United States and Canada. eFuels are increasingly recognized worldwide as a meaningful solution for achieving net zero in the transport sector. Together with Porsche Consulting, we have conducted a comprehensive analysis of various technologies. Our study, Unlocking the Potential of eFuels, Climate Contribution and Success Factors for Ramp-Up, provides an analytical assessment of the future eFuel market. We examined bottlenecks across all powertrain technologies. Our assumptions are grounded in the EU impact assessment by the European Commission with regard to the 2040 climate targets. The Commission projects that by 2040 approximately 37% of passenger cars, 62% of trucks, and more than 80% of ships and aircraft will still depend on liquid fuels. That demand will need to be met by renewable fuels in the long term. We have to leave the fossil phase. At the same time, our analysis shows that demand for liquid fuels could actually increase. Only a combination of electric mobility and renewable fuels can secure the climate targets in the transport sector. eFuels can make a substantial contribution to staying within Europe's carbon budget, particularly if the electrification of road transport does not advance as quickly as the European Commission has planned. With an ambition scaled up and the industrial potential of the eFuel sector exceeds projected demand, in the European transport market. Under optimal conditions, global e-fuel production could reach 200 billion liters of gasoline equivalent by 2045, sufficient to supply aviation and shipping, as well as the remaining demand from road transport. Concerns about supply conflicts between sectors are therefore unfounded. The potential of our industry is substantial. That said, many of these projects are still waiting for their final investment decisions. Fewer than 10% are ready to go. That needs to change. Whether we reach these volumes ultimately comes down to the political will and to how final investment decisions can be supported. A look at China makes this clear. These actors already account for global 80% of globally announced e-methanol production. Capacity through 2030 already. More than 60% of electrolyzers manufacture is now located in China. They are building facilities, making investment decisions, and creating capacity. China demonstrates that where the right framework conditions exist, scale-up follows. But China also serves as a warning. Europe risks once again falling behind in a technology where it has been so far at the frontier. The conclusion for Europe: the industrial potential is there. The technology is ready. What we need are ambitious quotas, reliable offtake mechanisms, and pragmatic production standards. In short, a regulatory framework that triggers investment and not hinders it like at the moment. A detailed look at the key findings will be presented by Managing Director Ralf Diemer, and the study methodology and scientific background will be explained by Dr. Tobias Block, Director of Strategy. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very interesting hour. And I pass over to Ralf.
Yeah, thank you very much, Monika. Also from here, my side, I'm Ralf Diemer, the Managing Director of the eFuel Alliance. A warm welcome. Thank you very much for joining. Up to 160 people are now in this call, which is really significant. So thank you for your interest. This is after 5 years of work. I think we can say our in terms of content and study, one of our great milestones in our work, this comprehensive study we conducted together with Porsche Consulting on the potential of e-fuels and, of course, how to unlock these potentials. Because, as Monika already stated, there is a lot more work to do to actually come to unlock the potentials. But what we wanted to show is that the potentials are actually there. What we are doing now, I will tell you in a nutshell the key findings of the study. And then I have some slides on the methodology, so what actually was done in this study. And then Tobias will go into the details. As Jan already stated, please place any questions anytime in the Q&A session and button. So use it, please, because I will then, or we will, of course, try to answer all the questions, and I will, of course, try to sort that out so that we get everything answered in this hour. Now, we have basically 5 key findings of this study. I think the first and major finding is that a fossil-free transport sector is possible at least by 2046. I mean, clearly we have our climate goals in Europe, and the eFuel Alliance is fully committed to contribute to the goal of climate neutrality in 2050 in the European Union. And it was always clear that we need a lot of different technology pathways to go and to come through this climate, to achieve this climate neutrality goal. Europe's demand for liquid fuels can be met fully by eFuels in at least 2046. So the debate we have in Europe right now, that there will be a competition for resources between the different transport modes like aviation, shipping, and road transport, which is still a blocking moment in EU's policies. If you look into the raw potentials of e-fuels, this competition does actually not exist. Despite the study's finding that the EU's impact assessment concerning the climate goals in 2040 assumes that the fuel demand will be too low by 2040. Even if the market ramp up of e-mobility is delayed, and there are some signs that this might actually happen, a climate neutral transport sector is possible by 2050 in combination with e-fuels. Then the study looked into the global picture where we are in terms of projects. Monica already stated, we see more than 500 e-fuel projects worldwide. Of course, plenty of investment decisions are needed to get these projects off the ground. Only 6% of them are actually on the way, are in construction, have final FID decision. Out of these 500, around 300 projects are contributing to the decarbonization of the road transport. 200 are in focus mainly on ammonium for primarily industrial use. We see more than 120 companies plan to ramp up their production by 2030. So this is really an emerging industry with a lot of different players, big players who are already in the energy market, but also a lot of startups and smaller players who actually start and who are committed to start this industry. This could, even by 2030, already result in the production of up to 20 billion liters of e-fuels. Then the study conducted bottleneck analysis. This is if you will, the key work. The study Porsche Consulting with SFA Oxford looked into 27 different bottlenecks concerning raw materials and also electricity production, and also the e-fuels value chain itself. So, raw materials for electrolyzers, for example, these kind of things. Even under optimistic assumptions, lithium, nickel, and the electricity grid are reaching their limits. So the study looks only into industrial feasibility of these products, of these raw materials, of the production chains. It is not looking about social issues or economical issues. And we see in comparison fewer bottlenecks in the fuel value chain. That means the demand for liquid fuels remains high. That is also a clear finding of the study. Of course, the demand in Europe will be lower than today, stay significantly lower through to electrification. But it's clear we have to ramp up production if we want to keep in our climate budget. 80%, and that is also one of the key findings of the study, they looked also into what kind of fuels are actually planned to produce. It is a clear picture that more than 80% of production items are concerned to e-methanol. And here, the interesting thing, Monica mentioned that already, that China in particular is focusing on this platform fuel very much so. It can be, of course, used directly, which we see already in shipping, for example, but it can be also further processed for use in aviation, shipping, and road transport. And then, of course, the last point, how to unlock the potentials, what is actually needed, which decisions are needed on the political side, mainly to ramp up the production of e-fuels. It requires ambitious targets in the Renewable Energy Directive, in the ReFuelEU Aviation and in the FuelEU Maritime regulation. we need definitely, and I think this is, I mean, that's not a new finding, but it's just underlined by the study again, a clear review of the production criteria under the Renewable Energy Directive. And we need a different regulatory framework, which includes all potential demand sectors, including road transport. So this division between the different sectors should stop, because otherwise we will not unlock the potential of it. Now, if you look into the methodology, basically 4 phases were done in this study. First of all, we looked into the EU ambition scenario coming from the impact assessment of the European Commission for the climate targets in 2040. Is this realistic? Are these scenarios which are in this impact assessment to reach the climate targets in 2040 realistic? And of course, it tries to check and verify the assumptions. Then the called bottleneck analysis comes in and creates bottleneck adjusted scenarios. So basically an analysis of the industrial feasibility of the EU ambition scenario. And again, I state, which is very important, we look not into social issues. We didn't look into the economic situation we are in, which of course has a lot of impact in the ramp up of new technologies, but that was not the aim of this study. Then we looked into the industrial e-fuel potential. So what is actually possible on the e-fuel side, and coming out of that, then a e-fuel status quo with clear data analysis of announced production capacities and make transparent on a global scale what actually is possible, but what challenges are is the market facing. Last but not least, the goals, just in a nutshell again. So we wanted to assess the market potential of e-fuels in road, maritime, and aviation sector. We wanted to create transparency about the implications of the EU transformation scenarios. Then we wanted to reveal the industrial constraints during the ramp-up processes of electric vehicles, and stipulating, lastly, measures on how e-fuels can contribute to reach the CO2 reduction targets. So clearly, it is not about different technologies playing out against each other. It is about the complementary approach, what technology can contribute in which way. And here, of course, since we are the eFuel Alliance, particularly on the field of e-fuels. With that, I would like to hand over to Tobias Block. He gives you now a little more detailed picture of these 4 different pillars of the study. And then, of course, we are happy to answer all your questions and enter into a debate. Thank you very much again for your contribution. And Tobias, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ralph. And also, I would like to take the opportunity and first of all, thank the team of the eFuel Alliance and the colleagues of Porsche Consulting for supporting us in the last 1.5 years and conducting the study. We are a small team, we are a small association, we are not a big NGO with a lot of capacities, so this really matters for us. I have the honor now to go more into the details and explain how the study has been conducted and what the results are. As Ralph already explained, the basis scenario, if you like, is the impact assessment of the European Commission for the climate targets 2040. And the first interesting results by analyzing the impact assessment was that we see that even the Commission sees that the internal combustion engine plays quite a dominant role in all transport modes, even in 2040. So even for passenger cars in the existing fleet, we will still have 37% of vehicles driving with an internal combustion engine on board. For trucks, it will be even more. It is 62%. And we currently see a political development leading more to more ICEs in future and less electric vehicles. So these numbers could be even higher in the end. For aviation and maritime, we don't have these controversial debates. Here, almost all stakeholders agree that the internal combustion engine and therefore the use of liquid fuels will stay relevant. What does it mean now for the different powertrain technologies and new registrations? You see on the left side the existing fleet, which is taken from the impact assessment. Just the numbers for 2035 and 2045 are extrapolated between the numbers because the impact assessment hasn't given any numbers here. The new registrations are then modeled with assumptions that we have taken into account together with Porsche Consulting. Here we have considered, for example, lifetime of vehicles, but also consumption, for example. And our goal was to have a fleet model which makes the numbers from the EU impact assessment achievable. And you can see it's quite ambitious. We have quite a big jump of ambition level. So, for example, from 2030 to 2045, 35, we need to multiply the number of new registration for battery electric vehicles by 5. So it's a quite ambitious increase for the electrification in the impact assessment of the Commission, and we will later challenge these assumptions. What's also interesting to see is that this is not really in line with the CO2 emission standards for passenger cars, for example, because even in 2040, we have vehicles like plug-in hybrids, which have a CO2 value at the exhaust pipe. So the minus 100% in 2035 might be quite difficult. All of this is increasing the pressure on the value chain for battery electric vehicles and materials. You can find here, for example, the 35% I mentioned before on the left slide in the year 2040. If you count together the battery electric vehicles, 26%, and the plug-in hybrids with 11%. One interesting side result was that by modeling the fleet numbers from the European Commission, we have recognized that it's basically impossible to get to that number of registrations in the fleet if the fleet size stays constant and if we assume that we have an average lifetime of vehicles of 16 years, which is taken from the German Umweltbundesamt. So if we want to have these numbers of electric vehicles in the fleet, we need to scrap existing vehicles. So we have to take vehicles out of the fleet to get to this high number of electric vehicles. And you can see here in this slide that from 2036, the model is starting to take vehicles out. And in total, we are talking about a sum of 75 million vehicles, which is quite a lot. And if you take the remaining value of these vehicles, it would accumulate to up to 200 billion euros. So it's quite a big financial number, and with this number we could also subsidize up to 20 billion liters. We haven't got an answer from the Commission yet how it is possible to achieve the number of electric vehicles without premature scrapping of existing vehicles. Also, from a sustainable point of view, I think it doesn't make sense to take away functional vehicles from the exit before the end of lifetime. Now we are converting the number of vehicles to the energy which is consumed Therefore, we also take the number from the European Commission, for example, for the liquid jet and maritime fuels. And you can see here quite interesting results. Of course, the amount of fossil diesel and gasoline is reducing a lot. This is clear if you want to achieve our climate targets. In addition, due to the increase of numbers of electric vehicles, electricity is increasing, and the Commission impact assessment also includes a lot of fuel cell vehicles, especially also for the truck sector, which I've not shown, but these slides are also available in the study for the truck sector, and I'm sure my colleague Jan can post the link to the study already in the chat. So we also have some amount of hydrogen. But nevertheless, if we count together all transport modes, we have more than 50% of the energy demand stays for liquid fuels. So we are not talking about that the liquid fuel value chain or ecosystem will disappear completely. It will definitely be reduced due to electrification. But even in this scenario, without considering bottlenecks yet, we have a liquid fuel demand of 128 billion liters left. We have chosen that energy value of liters gasoline equivalent because we thought it might be easier to compare it. Of course, you can also use, I don't know, joule or terawatt hours or ton of oil equivalent, but the study has been calculated always in liter gasoline equivalent. The EU Commission also gives some numbers for eFuels, which are, from our perspective, quite comparable low. We basically just have eFuels for the maritime and aviation sector due to existing regulations like ReFuelEU Aviation and FuelEU Maritime. On top, we have just a few demand for gasoline and diesel. This is important because later we will see that for the bottleneck analysis for the e-fuel sector, it is possible to scale up this technology even faster. What's also interesting, if we compare the number in 2030 with the current status of the RED III implementation in Europe, and we had an interesting webinar last week where we have shown the current status of RED III implementation and have discussed it with experts from Finland and Portugal. If you're interested you'll find the recording on our YouTube channel. We already see that in 2030 we have a demand due to the RED III implementation of more than 3.4 billion liters, and some member states are still missing here. And for some member states, like in Germany, we still have the hope that the RFMBO quota, so the quota for hydrogen and e-fuels, will be increased in future. We are now coming to the second phase of the study, which is the industrial bottleneck analysis, where we are challenging the rate of electrification in the study. Let me first explain how we have done it. For analyzing how much different, for example, raw materials will be available or electrolysis, we have taken the scenarios from the International Energy Agency because they are not only showing potential supply for the transport sector, but they have also taken into account other sectors because, for example, batteries are also demanded not just in mobility. And they have also analyzed this for all regions because Europe won't be able to get the global supply completely. We have to share the supply also with other regions. Then we have calculated this down to the EU mobility demand. When it comes to the exploration in future, we have two different scenarios, a probable ramp-up scenarios, which I will explain in the next slide for the example of lithium, and a progressive ramp-up scenario. In the end, it's just a comparison year by year of global supply and global demand and broken down to the EU mobility sector. And if in a certain year we have more demand than supply, then we see a bottleneck, and then we conclude that the powertrain scenario has to be adjusted. Coming to the example of lithium, for example, on the left side, you see that we have taken the historical data from the International Energy Agency. Then for the next 5 years between 2025 and 2030, we have taken into account the announced projects, which are also documented by the International Energy Agency. This is already quite optimistic that we assume that all announced projects will be realized for the year between 2030 and 2035. We have the so-called CAGR, the continued average growth rate of the average what we have seen before, so 4%. And then we have taken into account another quite optimistic assumptions. We are taking the growth rate of the best year until 2035. In this case, in 2023, we had the highest rate of growth for lithium. So from 2035 until 2050, we are considering this growth. If we remember, in 2023, we had a big hype for electrification. Everyone wanted to be all electric. For that reason, a lot of lithium mining and refining projects got announced and realized. We have also, as mentioned, taken into account global demand also in other sectors, and also recycling materials, so secondary lithium. On the right side, we have compared with the number of electric vehicles. The experts from Porsche Consulting, they have different battery cell models to analyze the chemistry, how the chemistry of battery cells will develop in future. This is important to know what kind of materials are in the batteries. So how much lithium, how much nickel and copper is required. And with the number of electric vehicles and the number of plug-in hybrids, you have in the end a total number of lithium which is required for the mobility sector in Europe. And you can see here that the EU impact assessment, the number of electric vehicles is much too ambitious when we compare this to the growth rate of lithium mining and refining. And for that reason, we have identified a bottleneck here of at least 30%. This is what we have done with 27 different bottlenecks for different technologies. And we have checked, for example, the raw material bottlenecks are peer-reviewed by experts from the University of Oxford, by SAFA, which have even given us a certificate. So we tried to double-check as much as assumptions as possible. Next to the bottlenecks we have identified for raw materials for the battery supply chain, basically lithium and nickel, we see on long term also issues with the transmission and distribution grid. For the hydrogen powertrain system, we see that currently we don't have enough hydrogen plants which are announced in Europe to supply the demand which will come with the announced fuel cell vehicles. On long term, we also see a bottleneck for the production capacity of fuel cells, because here not enough is announced to cover the number of vehicles which are announced by the European Commission. Where you see a lot of green dots, and this is basically because the ambition level of the European Commission is quite low, is for eFuels. We have analyzed how fast we can ramp up electrolysis here, how fast we can ramp up methanol synthesis, Fischer-Tropsch reactors, but of course also wind power and photovoltaic. And much more could be possible here. So what does it mean for the powertrain scenario for the different technologies in the fleet? We now have developed a bottleneck adjusted scenario. So we have always brought into market as much vehicles as possible until this powertrain technologies comes to a bottleneck. So we took as many electric vehicles as possible until the bottleneck, for example, with lithium has been reached. The same we have done for fuel cell vehicles and then for ICEs as well. And if we take these bottlenecks serious, and Ralph has mentioned, it's just the industrial potential of these criteria. It's not about social thing which we can discuss, or political developments, or economic numbers. All these additional bottlenecks will just lead to less electric vehicles and more ICEs in the mix. You can see on the left side again, for example, if we look in the year 2040 and see the 37% of ICEs, in the bottleneck adjusted scenarios we have in the fleet, instead of 37%, we have now 60% of ICEs. So we see a delay of electrification and a much longer life of the internal combustion engine. This, of course, will lead to a higher fuel demand. If we have more ICEs, we will need more liquid fuels. So in average, we have an increase of 14%, in some years, even a demand of up to 23%. So instead of the 128 billion liters of gasoline equivalent, we have now in 2050 180 billion liters, which of course has impact on our goal of achieving the climate targets and on the overall CO2 emissions. In the third phase, we have then analyzed how we can still reach the climate goals, what can be done more for other technologies. And as said, for the e-fuel technology, we have a lot of green dots. That means we could ramp up e-fuels faster. If we take the industrial potential with the same methodology that we have used for other criteria, then it is possible to ramp up electrolysis synthesis reactor production to a total production capacity of more than 200 billion liters in the year 2046. This is the absolute maximum under optimistic assumptions. And this is just possible if we get full political support. And probably not all of this will be needed because, for example, the study has not taken into account the amount of biofuels, which will, of course, still exist in the market. It should just show us how much is possible in theory. In the green area on the button, you see what the EU Commission is planning in their impact assessment. So up to 3 times more e-fuels could be possible. And the good message for the climate targets is due to the bottlenecks we have identified basically for the electric mobility, we have an increase of the CO2 emissions. We probably would emit 1.7 gigatons more. Here it is important to say that this calculation in the study was done on life cycle assessment. So the whole CO2 emissions along the whole value chain, vehicle production, inclusive the battery production, the use phase, and the recycling phase was taken into account here. And the good message is that we can scale up e-fuels faster and therefore reduce the CO2 emissions. So it is still possible to keep our CO2 budget and to stop global warming below 1.75 degrees Celsius. The last phase of the study, and then I'm coming to your questions, is that we had a look on the current market phase of e-fuels. So we have analyzed the databases which are existing, for example, from the International Energy Agency, but we also got support, for example, from the Volkswagen Research Department for assessments in China, because that's sometimes not easy to Google if you are not located there or if you don't speak the language. And as Ralph already said, we have more than 300 projects of e-fuels for the transport sector. So this is a production of e-gasoline, e-methanol, or e-kerosene. What's not included here is, for example, ammonia for the shipping sector or for the industry. And also what's not included here is hydrogen in refineries. Some interesting takeaways are that in Europe we see more smaller projects, middle-sized projects. This is from our understanding, basically because of limited amount of renewable electricity and also CO2 sources. And we see larger projects in China, South and North America. China is really ramping up, and we have to be careful that we are not losing the next technology to Chinese developers. It is quite impressive how they ramped up, for example, electrolyzers production capacities. 5 years ago, Germany was still market leader when it comes to electrolyzers. Meanwhile, China has more than 60% of the electrolyzers capacity, production capacity. There are also some projects which have survived the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, and also some projects in Australia. If we count together all these projects, we could come in theory to a production capacity of 20 billion liters. When we see the market players, we see a quite fragmented picture. So more than 100 companies are involved in different consortium, in different projects. We see on position 2, 3, and 4 Chinese project developers, which shows how much China is interested in these technologies. And I think for sure we will have a consolidation of that market in future. Not all of these projects will be realized, and it will be interesting to see who will survive here in future. We also have a lot of interesting members of the eFuel Alliance, like HIF, like Nordic Electrofuel, like Liquid Wind or Eneratech. If you want to support our work, if you want to be member of the eFuel Alliance, please reach out to us. We can do this and studies like this only because of your support. Ralph already said that more than 80% are following the methanol route. Just 18% are following methanation and Fischer-Tropsch. This is interesting because, for example, for e-kerosene, Fischer-Tropsch is the only technology route which is certified at the moment. The methanol to kerosene route is on a fast track, but not 100% available yet. Unfortunately, and now we're coming to the bad news, not all of these 300 projects have an FID. And we will never have 100% here, but 6% are quite low, and this has to be increased. So we had a look on these 300 projects, and we have identified in which project phase they are. 76% are in a concept or feasibility stage. 14% are in FEED, so they have already developed the engineering, the design of the plant. Here you often have already to spend millions, and just 6% have an FID. And this low number is, from our perspective, mainly due to the political framework, which definitely have to be improved. We have identified basically 3 challenges for the e-fuel industry at the moment. It's first of all the low quotas. Although we see in the RED III implementation that some member states are doing more, we think that much more could be possible. Last week, the European Commission has started the consultation for RED IV. Here we will discuss targets for hydrogen and e-fuels until 2050. This will hopefully lead to a better demand signal and therefore for a higher FID rate. Second, we already talked about also in the Renewable Energy Directive, we have quite restrictive production criteria for e-fuels and hydrogen. So for example, if you want to produce green hydrogen, you're just allowed to use electricity from new installations, which are not older than 36 months when your electrolyzers get into operation. You need to provide hourly correlation of the generation of renewable electricity and the consumption of electricity in the electrolyzers from 2030 on. Industrial CO2 point sources are only allowed until 2041, even if it's unavoidable CO2 emissions, like for example from cement plants. And each of these criteria are increasing the production costs. Some location are not able to fulfill it. So it's also reducing the production capacity. And I was glad to hear last week at the Hydrogen Regulatory Forum in Rotterdam that Germany, Spain, Netherlands, Austria, also with Poland, Hungary, and Italy and Czechia called the Commission to change the delegated acts to make them more pragmatic. And we really hope that the Commission, DG ENER, is listening and do it in a swift and fast way. We don't want long discussions about the production rules, but we need to change it because we see it's not working. Last but not least, also the controversial debate about the use of e-fuels in the road sector is hindering investments because the by far largest target market with the highest willingness of pay is taken out. And we are also positive to see that the Commission is correcting their path here. And is allowing the use of renewable fuels in the CO2 emission standards. But also this is far away from being perfect. Also this has to be further expanded. Last but not least, we have seen also last week that the aviation industry is starting to challenging the use of eSAF and the quotas of the ReFuelEU Aviation. Because of this, it's even more important that we are thinking more broader and taking into account more target markets. I hope I could give you a good overview about the study and some interesting insights. And for the moderation of the Q&A, I'm handing back to Ralph.
Thank you very much, Tobias. We have a lot of questions coming in already. So please, if you have a question to add, just press the F&A button and put it in there. Some of the questions we will answer in a written form because they might be very specific, also concerning to the study, but I will try to bring forward to start with the more broader questions. And I would start with one from Jean-Baptiste Jarin, who is referring to what I said in the beginning about that we would need to open up all relevant sectors, and he's for the usage of e-fuels, and he's asking the aviation sector is already complaining about the low volumes and high prices concerning e-fuels, and is requesting, that happened actually recently by Airlines for Europe, the European Commission to revise its 2030, 2032 and 2035 ambitions in the ReFuelEU Aviation. Then Jean-Baptiste is also putting down the potential numbers of fuel consumption needs in the aviation sector, and asked why we are not concentrating on this sector before we open up the usage of e-fuel for other sectors. And I think the question is rightly placed, but I think the opposite is true. First of all, we do not agree with the assessment of Airlines for Europe that the fuel production is not available for achieving the ReFuelEU Aviation targets. I think that is the first thing we have to state here. We believe that there is still enough potential and time for the investments to resolve the needs coming from this regulation. But secondly, and that is also what we stated in our position papers, the problem with the aviation sector is not that they need these fuels. The problem is how can they pay for these fuels? And the aviation sector is in global competition, and global competition is heavy in terms of prices. So it is maybe the sector of the transport sectors which has the lowest willingness to pay compared to other sectors. That is the opposite in the road sector. And that is one of the main reasons why we believe that we have to open up road sector for the usage of e-fuels to ramp up production, to achieve scale effects faster, and then to make also jet fuel easier and better, and at the end of the day also cheaper available for the aviation sector. So that is exactly also the message of the study, that we would like to get rid of this sectoral debate. We have to see all the sectors together. Besides the fact that, of course, right now, jet fuel can be also only produced via the Fischer-Tropsch route, because that's the only certificate route. And in Fischer-Tropsch, you always have byproducts. Actually, very often jet fuel is a byproduct. So that is why, that is the second reason why we have to open up road transport. That would be the first question I would like to place. Then we have a question for Tobias from Fabienne Bardinet. Elaborate a little bit more. He did already a little in his slides, but maybe you can add a little more information on the production criteria under the Renewable Energy Directive. What do you mean in details by review the production criteria, Tobias?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it at the end of my speech, that here I mean the delegated acts of the RED, Article 27, 28. These have resulted in two delegated acts, which are defining what kind of electricity is allowed to be used for RFMBOs, so for hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives like e-fuels. And the second one is about how to calculate the GHG reduction methodology. And here also the eligible CO2 sources are defined. And from our perspective, but this is backed by basically the whole industry, I would say. There are just a few NGOs and member states left which are calling to keep the delegated acts how they are. These are too restrictive. It's increasing the production cost too much in the beginning. There are already some independent peer review studies out showing how much, for example, that moving from monthly temporal correlation to hourly temporal correlation is increasing the production cost up to 35%. It's always depending on where your production site is and what kind of electricity supply you're taking into account. But if we really want to ramp up an hydrogen economy in Europe, this is not the way how we should start. We are not advocating on removing the production criteria completely. We just want to have a different start, a more pragmatic start. On long term, we need clear sustainability rules. Probably we even need more of that, for example, thinking about water management, but not right now, not in the beginning. It's taking the air we need to breathe. If I may continue, Ralph, there's a question about production costs, and we have a slide for that in the presentation.
I think the question I wanted to raise also at next. So please continue.
Thanks a lot. So Philip Weikamp, who's doing a brilliant job in analyzing also the production criteria and supporting companies and startups, has asked about the production costs. In the study, we are using production cost model by Porsche Consulting again. The model is showing how the production cost can be decreased, mainly due to three levels we have identified. It's first of all economy of scale. So if we are not having a production size of 10 kiloton methanol, for example, but 500, you get better prices if you order more electrolyzers, if you order larger synthesis plants. That's how you can reduce the production cost. Second, it's about location. 60% of the levelized cost of RFMBO production is the electricity. So if you move, for example, from Central Europe to areas where you have much more wind and photovoltaic, that's a famous example here is the Porsche plant in or the Porsche HIF plant in Patagonia. There you have a utilization rate for wind energy of up to 7,000 hours per year. So almost 3 times more than we have in Germany. This is compensating a lot of the efficiency losses we have for e-fuels as well. And it's bringing electricity prices down to below 2 cents per kilowatt hour. And this is another lever to reduce production cost. And then we can do something with technology. Basically, a lot can be done with heat management. The synthesis is exothermic. That means we have high temperatures here that could be used, for example, in direct air capturing or in neighboring industries or district heating grids if you are, for example, in Scandinavian countries. In the end, in a long-term perspective, we think we can go down to approximately 1.2 euro per liter, but that requires, as said, scaling of the technology, production in best locations, and technology improvements.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Then we have, oops, now I lost my F&A button. Sorry, here we are. Another question I find interesting, which we should maybe cover, Tobias, is the next one. Well, I lost it now. I'm so sorry. I have a technical problem here. Production cost we already did. A question about China. It's an anonymous spectator asking if it's true that many of the projects we see happening in China, in the same time we are arguing that the EU production criteria is relevant for the uptake of e-fuel. So how does it fit together? Because when they are produced in China, are they produced after the EU production criteria, or do they have different criteria? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, Tobias.
Yeah, there are some projects in China are used to address the European market. For example, we have the cooperation of Maersk and Goldwind to produce methanol for the maritime sector. We currently have 3 Chinese projects which already have received RFMBO certification. That means that they are fulfilling all production criteria and that they probably also target the European market. Europe is, I would say, by far the most developed e-fuel market because it's the only market where we have clear demand signals with mandates and quotas in combination with high penalties, which is putting that much pressure on off-takers that they are signing, still too low, but they are signing off-take agreements. And for that reason, yes, I think partly it's meant to export e-fuels to Europe. But China has also a lot of interest in being more energy independent and increasing the resilience on oil and gas imports. Especially today, when we see how oil and gas prices are increasing due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we think it's important to develop alternative routes. And e-fuels have the great advantage that they can be produced in much more countries than countries we are importing fossil fuels from at the moment. So of course we should avoid getting into new dependencies. But it's possible to produce e-fuels around the globe, also in much more democratic countries that fossil fuels are produced at the moment.
Thank you. Then maybe a broader question to wrap up here, because we are already in our time limit. How would the automotive package affect the development of BEVs? That's of course an open question, since we do not exactly know what is happening with the automotive package. But clearly, I would say the automotive package is due to the fact that reality kicks in the market, because the problem of the automotive manufacturers right now is that since the ramp up of electric cars in Europe goes not as fast as predicted, they are struggling to fulfill their only tailpipe valued CO2 targets. And that is why the discussion came up that these targets have to be adjusted. I think that's the main reason. For us, the automotive package is the chance to open up road transport also for the usage of e-fuels. We always believed, and we strongly believe, that the idea that road transport should be excluded of the uses of e-fuels is just wrong for the reasons we already laid out. And that is why we believe that we have now a chance to add to the offtake of electric cars, to also add the usage of alternative fuels. And you could also add other technology methods, such as green steel or green aluminium, if you wish. And we could enter slowly into a different approach to look into CO2 emissions in road transport, road sector, and particularly for cars. So a lot of questions. Thank you very much. We are 5 after 10 already reaching. Our colleagues are already answering also some questions in the chat. We will try to answer those ones who were not answered yet in this webinar by chat afterwards. We would like to thank you all for participating. That was our first webinar. We will see some other events around this study, so stay tuned. That will not be the last effort to bring you the facts and figures closer. You can see this webinar also afterwards in our YouTube channel. I would like to thank Monica, Tobias, Jan, and the colleagues from Porsche Consult for doing this today. I would very much thank the eFuels team for preparing everything, particularly also the slides and the preparation for the webinar. It is Friday today, so the last day of the week. We wish you all a nice weekend. Stay healthy and hope to see you again soon in one of our webinars or other events of the eFuel Alliance. Thank you very much.